welcome back to our program Dr. Yohuru Williams, Associate Professor of History and Director of Black Studies at Fairfield University. Hi, Dr. Williams. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Jessica. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, in the wake of the Colorado shooting and with the presidential campaign going on right now, there is prompting by Mayor Bloomberg for the presidential candidates to take a side on gun control issues and the Second Amendment. Can you talk to us more about that?
Certainly. What Bloomberg said essentially is that he'd hoped both President Obama and candidate Romney would speak candidly about what their plans were for gun control for the future, and looking at this incident as a lens into some pretty tragic events over the last 3 years. Certainly the Tucson incident that resulted in the death of 6 people in the shooting of Congressman Gabby Giffords, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, which again is a case of gun control, and then certainly the Aurora shooting itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what about the Second Amendment, and can you tell me a little bit more about the origins of it, and does it still have a place in today's society and political climate? It's
a great question, Jessica, and it depends on who you talk to. There are those who argue that if you look at the language of the amendment, it was meant to address the historical circumstances of that moment. The United States had just fought a revolution against Great Britain, and the language of the amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right to bear arms of the people shall not be abridged. In today's context, people question whether that's necessary, particularly because we have a modern police force, and certainly some of the weapons that people want to have access to are not weapons that one would use for hunting or other things of that nature, but literally the instruments of war. The gun, for example, that John Holmes used in the Aurora shooting held a 100 capacity magazine. Certainly no one needs that for hunting.
And just to back up for 1 second, is a militia necessary today?
Well, one can make the case that it is, but we have that in the form of the National Guard and state militias. And so that need is being met by the state and by organizations that are responsible in the care and distribution of those weapons. And that's ultimately what gun control advocates argue we should have. Not that they're necessarily opposed to individual ownership of handguns, but that there should be careful regulation of how those guns are distributed and what steps people have to go through to have access to them.
Right. And let's talk about some of those regulations that are around now and any certain court cases that address the issue.
Again, great question, Jessica, and there have been 2, which don't bode well for any major legislation dealing with gun control. We really need a constitutional amendment. In 1975, the District of Columbia, which historically has had terrible problems with gun violence, passed an act that really banned the ownership of handguns and said that people who did had to have a lock on those guns. In 2008, the United States Supreme Court heard a challenge to that act and actually decided that the District of Columbia's law was unconstitutional, that individuals do have a right to bear arms. Now, the interesting thing about that case is because D.C. is a federal district, the question was, would that apply to the states? In 2010, the Supreme Court answered that in a case, McDonald versus Chicago, where they said, look, this applies across the board. So the court's been very clear. The Second Amendment does guarantee individuals the right to bear arms. The question now, and this is what Bloomberg has really put to Obama and really put to Romney, is what type of progressive legislation can we enact that will limit access of weapons of mass destruction, these assault rifles and others, to individuals who might be mentally unstable or who show signs of being mentally unstable, so we don't have another Aurora tragedy.
Right. And I mean, it seems like you wouldn't want somebody who does have obviously a criminal background or a history of mental illness to have access to guns, and because the regulations aren't strict. But why is this such a political football now? Why doesn't anybody want to take a specific stance on it?
Well, you have 2 very powerful lobbies that are involved here. The National Rifle Association is very powerful, and their argument consistently has been any regulation is going to restrict people's ability to have access to firearms. That's not true. We saw in the immediate aftermath of the Aurora shooting that gun sales in Colorado shot up 43%. So the question that people don't have access to firearms is in and of itself problematic. The other problem is politically, in a nation of 300 million, there are 283 million guns currently owned in America. People from the outside world, look at this and say, the freest nation of the world has this problem with violence. 34 Americans are killed a day in incidents of gun violence. We have to focus on, again, progressive legislation that deals with this issue, and maybe that begins with a conversation about why we have so many of these violent shootings.
Okay, and my final question to you is, the NRA, are they the bad guy in this issue?
Tough question, because as a civil libertarian, you applaud the NRA for making the case that we want to preserve the Bill of Rights, and the Second Amendment is crucial to that. At the same time, we cannot look at the statistics. We can't look at Tucson or Virginia Tech, certainly Colorado, Aurora, Colorado, and be comfortable that we're in a good place with regard to enlightened legislation that deals with this issue of gun violence.
All right. Well, thank you. It was very insightful having you here, and I appreciate you being here. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Great seeing you.
You too.